Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of The Deliberate Zoomer, hosted by myself, Silas Maynor, and my good friend, Michael Simonton. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Who?
All right, welcome back to another episode of The Deliberate Zoomer with Michael Simonton, myself, Silas Maynor, and today we are joined by Aidan Noonan, the man, the myth, the legend. How's it going?
It's going, man. It's going. I like that. The man, the myth, the legend. Right on. I've referred to a couple people to that myself, but never me personally. So that's a cool thing to intro as. Right on.
Yeah, for sure. You're now in the club, for sure.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, yeah, today we're going to interview Aidan here and kind of just discuss his experience and everything. And just for everybody listening, this is the way we like to do this is generally when we bring on our guests. Last time we brought on Garrett, that was my friend. This is Michael's friend. We just don't know much about each other, don't know about our guests. So we like to just ask those inquisitive questions so you can see us get to know each other. I'll let you run this one, Michael, and I'll just kind of jump in.
Right on. Yeah. So thank you, Silas. And Aidan, it's great to have you on, my man. I mean, we don't see enough of each other as it is. So no, I think the best way to start it off is just kind of to give you a refresher about what we're trying to do here with the series. And it's the Deliberate Zoomer. It's, how do we live our lives deliberately through our 20s to set ourselves up for success? Now, I know you personally. We've known each other for a long time. And in many cases, this is somewhat of a rags to riches story. So I think it'd be good as a good place and good foundation to start off of. Just, give us a little bit of background about yourself, your story, like where you came from and then up to where you are now. And then from there, we can dive into what led you there.
Definitely. Well, first off, Mike should know better than to give me a mic. He should really know better. This could go on for out. No, but yeah, definitely, man. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, guys. In just total transparency here, right? Like Silas said, I don't really know too much about Silas. The podcast I'm a little familiar with, watched you guys before. And this was very impromptu to hop on here and get this going. So keep that in mind, right? But no, definitely, dude. As far as background goes, Mike briefly mentioned it, right? It was not necessarily the most glorious of childhoods, teenage years, and growing up in general. Not to say I was as bad off as some people, right? I had a roof over my head, or at least a partial roof. And, there were some nice things about it. I grew up with a big family. There was 7 total of us, not quite as big as Mike's, but close to it. We were not the richest of people. We weren't the poorest of poor, but we definitely were not the richest. And just growing up, money was something that you didn't really talk about because it was always a sensitive subject, especially from my dad and mom, right? They didn't like to talk about it. They didn't like us to bring it up because even though they were doing poorly with it, they didn't want us to be knowing that, first off, and also like spreading that word or talking about it. It's a sensitive subject. No one wants to be ousted as not being good with money or put in that light. So that was kind of my childhood, right? I joke and say, to summarize my childhood, we would eat spaghetti pretty much every night. And then on our birthdays, we would get meatballs in that spaghetti. So like that was the childhood type of atmosphere. So it was fun though, right? I had a lot of siblings. We did some fun stuff. I lived in Florida my whole life, but never went to Disney World. Just these weird like things that you think about now when you get older and look back at. But going through it all, it was really just, I didn't want to grow up and be that. I didn't want to grow up and have kids who worried about whether we were going to have a house the next month or not. Not that we maybe necessarily should have worried about that, but we did because it was a real worry. So that was probably my motivator from a young age on. And probably the single most important piece of my life growing up, making sure I did everything to a certain standard for myself to make sure I grew up out of that and would actually get out of that kind of poverty hole that you see a lot of people stuck in.
Nice, right on. And then so that's where you came from. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to today and where you are now.
Definitely. So I was finishing up, or I guess should say I was 16, 17 years old. Started dual enrolling in college, which was an opportunity I had down in Florida with one of the local colleges there. I dual enrolled, and I got my first 2 years of college done within my high school years. Had maybe, I think, like 2 classes I had to take afterwards, and then officially graduated and moved on to my bachelor's. So I actually started off in a political science degree, going to UCF, and was just, and Mike knows this, in love with politics, in love with law. And that was my track. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to go for political science. I was going to go into law school after, and I was going to become a lawyer. That kind of changed partially through, I was starting to realize that, not that shouldn't say school wasn't for me, but that amount of school I didn't really want to commit to. I didn't want to commit to this crazy number of hours, these crazy number of years of my life to school, to maybe make a paycheck after, to maybe make this giant paycheck. So I stuck with school, but went a much less drastic route, and I switched over to to doing a bachelor's in business management to be exact, with a specialization in sales and marketing. And I finished off that degree back in 2019. And in that period, I got the opportunity to intern at IBM in their digital sales organization. I did so for 3 months out in Massachusetts, probably the 3 most uncomfortable months of my life. Really had to grow in that situation, and did well enough in that internship to where I got a job offer to return to IBM when I graduated, returned to IBM on their sales team, went through their whole training program, which was about 6 months long, and moved into an actual sales role, which now I'm in a digital sales role, client facing, dealing with any kind of deals for what we call mobile device management, from $5,000 to $250,000, $300,000 plus. Anything in that area is what I'm dealing with today. And that's kind of my spot, right? And dealing with those kind of deals, there's money to be made there. So it's good. It's been a lot of fun. And that's kind of where I'm at now, right?
So could you maybe speak a little bit more about kind of your thought process and how you chose to switch your path in college? I'm curious about that and kind of what you saw as the real value of college for you.
Definitely. So I'll be the first to tell you, college isn't for everyone. In its like natural institution, it never was meant for everyone. It was really kind of just meant for the actual, like, I would say the learner, right? The guy, somebody who's just in the business of learning, and that's it. And it's kind of grown into a lot more than that today. I don't think you need college to be successful, but what I had wanted was that backing, was that piece of paper that said that you could be hired by this many more people, which is really what college has turned into today. Now, as far as the transfer of degrees goes, political science and law is still probably my biggest passion. There's even a piece of me that will look back at that and say, I kind of regret it. But ultimately, and not to outline any specific beliefs one way or another, whatever you want is cool with me. But it was in college, you could feel that they were preaching a very specific agenda inside that realm. So I wanted to get out of that. I didn't think it was for me. I didn't think it was doing me any justice. So I switched over to business because I was told by a lot of people, right, this is a lot more applicable. You can make a lot more money doing this in a lot shorter of a time period. And for me personally, not doing college was never really an option. And that's only really because I had already gotten so far along that it would have seemed pointless to drop out or not complete it. And I knew I had this opportunity with IBM lined up at a certain point in that career, or in that college, in my college career.
Yeah. And so one thing I'm always interested is, I feel like for most people, especially coming, and I can kind of relate with your background to some extent, is what was kind of a point when you decided and something specifically changed when you were younger that you said, I'm not gonna let this happen to me. I'd also be curious to know where you fall into the number of siblings, which order you're in, because I would be curious to hear a little bit more about that decision and that ownership of it.
No, definitely, man. I'm glad you asked that, actually. So as far as siblings go, I have 2 younger sisters, and then I have 3 older brothers. 4 older brothers. So I fall kind of middle packish. There's right around the middle pack. And as far as like moments in my life, one of the things that I always reference is, this might be a little crude, but we had roofing problems and mold in our house for my entire life. We never got it fixed. It was an expensive fix. We couldn't afford it. Our plumbing never worked. So you'd have the shower filling up. If someone took a shower before you, forget about it. That was the only shower happening that day, unless you want to flood the bathroom. When you're going to the bathroom, right, if it was raining outside, you might as well bring an umbrella with you. So I would say there was this, and I remember it pretty vividly. There's a moment I'm doing my business, right, and I'm just sitting there, and there's water dripping on my head, and I'm like, I will not live like this. I'm like, I will not live like this. I can't. My kids won't live like this. My wife won't live like this. Nothing against my dad. He worked really hard. He did. He had a job for most of my life. There was a couple of periods where he didn't, but he worked really hard. So nothing against him, but I didn't want to be in that situation. And I knew from their mistakes, right, the things I could do differently. But I would say when I came to my epiphany, I was dropping a deuce, man.
For sure. Well, what a time. What a time. I feel like some of the best thoughts come to us while we're using the bathroom, whether showering or taking a good one. Yeah, Michael, do you want to interject some questions here at this point?
At this point in time, I mean, I'd love to. No, so Aidan, obviously, like we know a little bit about each other. We've been childhood friends, but I think one thing to paint the picture, just for some people who haven't maybe like connected those dots, coming from, a scenario where, you have water dripping on your head and we're taking a dump to the beautiful house that I know you live in now with your gorgeous wife, Kaylee, and all these things. It seems like many people would say you've made it, or you've at least, you've made something of yourself, and that's something to be proud of. How did you go about doing that? Obviously, you mentioned college and whatnot, but like, what specifically were you doing through those later years of high school? What were those thoughts that led you to, set out upon this path and like to make that sacrifice? Where you're, forsaking the short-term goals or goods, instant gratification for like that long-term of success. How did that look like for you?
And just quick to add to that question, essentially, what kept you going, even though it was tough, right? You obviously had that motivation from a kid. You didn't want that, but what kept you going, and what did you put in place to make sure you stayed on track?
Definitely. So both really good questions. And I'll preface by saying, right, in a lot of lights, right, I have made it, but that's kind of the attitude you have to have, is that I haven't made it yet, right? I love where I'm at right now. I love the house I'm in, but I haven't made it yet, because I could have a better house. I could have better things inside this house. I could be better personally. I could be better spiritually, whatever it is, right? Kind of having that mindset of, you made it far, but I haven't made it. Or I've made it far, but I haven't made it yet, right? So that's probably the mindset I've been in since I was 15, 16 years old. As far as the actionable steps taken and kind of the attitude there, Mike maybe knows a little bit about this background, but when I was going through high school and doing college, that actually wasn't all I was doing. I was also working a 40-hour-a-week job at a restaurant, which was probably to date the hardest work I'd ever done in my life. Stuff was ridiculous. There were days I was driving home, and we lived down in Florida. You take US 1 home, the water's right there. I would look at that water like, man, it would be great if I could just take a quick left. And this is ridiculous. Like, this stuff is insane. Why am I doing this to myself? Sometimes I wanted to quit school, work, everything for that instant gratification. That instant gratification of, now I don't have to wake up and do something in the morning. I don't have to wake up and worry about this or that. The things that kept me going were when I would get home to my parents' house and I would see it. I'd pull in after all the anger. I'd see that house and I'd say, this is what I'm working for. To not be here, to be so many leagues above here that I never look at here again. It's somewhere in the back of my head, and I remember that this happened, but to where I never have to look at it again, to where my kids never experience that again. You really have to get yourself in the mindset of the future will be better. You have to, I hate this term, but to an extent, trust in the system. I'm not saying the system that you have no control over. I'm talking about the system you set in place for yourself. I definitely set a system in place. I had a plan sketched out, especially once I turned towards the business atmosphere as opposed to the law. Even when I was going for law, there was a plan in place. But when I switched it, there was a full-fledged plan there. There was a goal there. I knew what I was targeting. I was seeking out internships during college. And when I got the one from IBM and it went great, first off, I wasn't going to let it not go great. You had that control, right? You have to understand that. Don't let things not go the way you want. You can control that. That's all on you. You're an individual. What you put forward will be received that way. I would go in and I would, like, just when I was at the internship, I should say, when I would go into work, I could feel, I'm like, this is what I want. I want to be able to go into work and know I'm making a ton of money doing it. And I'm doing something that really isn't half bad. Like, I'm not stressed out all the time about it. Those types of things were reassuring. Those are what kept me going. Remembering the days in the restaurant and how I never want to do that again keeps me going now to this day. But it was just, seeing the treachery for what it was and then having faith in a better outcome. It's not easy. Most people can't do it, right? And I'm not saying I'm something great. I mean, in the sense that you hit a point where you look at it and you're like, why am I doing this? This is pointless. What if there is no light? You have to trust that you've set yourself up right to where there is a light at the end of that tunnel. And I had to continuously tap into that trust in myself. Because if I didn't have that trust in myself, the trust in the system I laid out, I would have totally flopped. I would have let it all go because it wasn't easy. And if anyone tells you it's easy, they're lying or they have super rich parents.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think here. So I'm curious to know a little bit about maybe some of the routines you developed or the things that were helpful, or I don't know, maybe it was mentors or anything like that. Because I know we've talked about kind of for people, I think the systems aspect, what you're talking about, is very good. We're actually going to be doing a series on Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules. And I think that the whole idea of setting rules for ourselves, we have this idea that we seek freedom. We want to be, our idea of freedom at least, which is like, do whatever you want, whenever you want. But in reality, that's essentially slavery to our lower passions, right? So I'm curious to know about your systems, like what you set in place, mentors, maybe some of the things that you can offer to people who are in a similar situation who may want to get out, but they don't necessarily believe or they don't know how or where to go.
Definitely. I love that you mentioned Peterson here in the 12 rules, because that is very real, right? You can sit there and smoke weed all day, drink alcohol when you're not smoking, or do it all together for 24/7 and feel happy and feel great. But you think you're free, but realistically, right, you're a slave to all of those things, and you'll never really be anything too great if you don't get out of that. So yeah, it's really about stepping back and realizing what real freedom is. And freedom is being able to, in a sense, restrict yourself as far as your passions and your desires go to make sure you create that better future. For me, as far as mentors go, I think that's probably the most important thing as far as driving to understand that what you're wanting is a reality for people and is something that's achievable. My uncle is very successful in a very different light than my father. He was very successful. He also had worked at IBM for years. He was one who gave me the idea to apply for their sales position. He was in the technical route. He wasn't anywhere near sales, but he knew about the sales organization. He gave me the idea to apply there. He, in a lot of ways, was somebody I looked up to, and I said, I want what he has. I want to, but I don't want to go and steal it. I don't want to take it, right? I don't want to be him, but I want what he has. I want the financial stability and success that he has. So how am I going to go about and do that? If you're on the lowest of lows, if you're in a even poorer household than I was, if you're constantly looking around the people around you, they're largely going to be in the same boat as you. And if those are the only people you're looking up to, you're going to continue to stay in that same area as all of them, because that's all you're looking at. You have to find somebody, and I tell, this is probably the thing I stress the most, so I'm glad you brought this up. You have to find somebody in your life, even if you don't know them, even if it's a celebrity or your favorite athlete, whatever it is. You have to find somebody who has the success you want, and you have to set your goal at that. Because if you're setting your goal with your peers and friends who are also doing lowly things, that's all you're ever going to be, because you have no expectations of above that. Me personally, mine was my uncle, and now it's my current boss, Carl. He's the guy, everything he does, it motivates me. I'm like, I want to be like this guy. He's got it down. He's killing it. And it's almost in a way you have to humble yourself to realize other people can be and are better than you. And you want to try to achieve that and greater things.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that for me, I've specifically had a lot of help from mentors as well. Having the fact that I didn't go to college, they really helped me to kind of advance to those next levels. So that's helpful. Mike, did you have anything that you wanted to kind of touch on in this section?
Yeah, no, I love it, Aidan. I think it's fantastic, especially especially what you're saying here. A lot of it reflects back on those previous episodes we shot with that 10-part series there. With, pick your friends, know your circle. We never touched on finding a mentor, I don't really believe. But I do, because it wasn't part of the book, but I do think that's super imperative. And I love how you kind of went into that. And you're absolutely right. Like, find someone doing better than you. And like you said, want what they have, fucking want it, and work your ass off to get it. But don't work to take it from them. You're not trying to take it from them. You're trying to achieve that same level. And that mentality switch is great. I do want to ask, like, you went to college route. Silas and I really didn't. So we know each other, and I'm sure you know quite a few more individuals similar to us who are in our shoes. And I just kind of like to hear your perspective on how those two differentiate, and what you'd suggest to anyone looking or pondering whether or not college is right for them, or how to move forward from there.
Definitely. And something I've learned growing through this is that there is no black and white. There's no one answer. There's no everybody don't go to college or everybody do go to college. The idea that when you're growing up that everyone needs to go to college, that's false. You don't. There are a lot of people who don't have to go. There are a lot of people who are very successful when they don't. There are some people who really should, or who maybe it's their calling and it's a good idea to go. The line is not super clear, and each person has to make that individual choice for themselves. The thing I'd say is take people's advice, but don't let someone sway that decision for you. If your parents are really pushing it and they're making good points, take those points into consideration. But ultimately, if you don't want to go, right, don't. If you don't think it's your thing, if it's beneficial to you, don't go. What I would stress is more so than wanting to go to college or not wanting to go to college, I'd stress having a plan either way. If you go to college with no plan, college will not benefit you at all. If you don't go to college and have no plan, you will never benefit from that decision at all. You have to have a plan one way or another, and you have to execute on that plan. If you go to college and you decide to go for communications, because everyone goes for communications, but you don't know what you're going to do with that communications degree, and you graduate and you have a communications degree, and you're like, I don't know what I want to do. You just wasted 4 years of your life. 4 years of your life you wasted because you went to college with absolutely no plan. You went because you were supposed to go. Don't go because you're supposed to go. Go because you made a plan and you have a reason for going. If you don't go to college, don't sit there and work random freight jobs for your whole life or working in a restaurant your whole life. If you don't go, have an alternative plan. Understand what your passion is, understand what you ultimately want to do, and go to that. So try to figure yourself out as early as possible. Some people can't. I understand that takes time, but I'd like to believe that by the time you're 18, everyone's had a pretty good chance at figuring out what they want in life. And yeah, decide on that as early as you can and execute. The other thing is know that it's not a jail sentence. Whichever route you choose, it's not a jail sentence. There's always time to change that decision if it proves to be the wrong one. But go with your gut. Go with what your instincts are telling you. Go with what you think is going to be good for you. Like, nobody else can tell you what's going to be good for you. Only you can take the outside opinions of others, but they can't tell you what's going to be good for you. You have to figure that shit out on your own. And that's just life.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. I was going to ask a few follow-up questions about the not knowing your plan and passions, and then you knocked them all out. But I would say that that's like, just to maybe add to that, to anybody listening, is like, especially it's not a jail cell, right? You make a plan. So I tell everybody, make some kind of plan and start working towards it, because at the very least, you're making progress. And then you start to get further, and then before you know it, you have more assets, more tools in your toolbox, and you can then help make more decisions going on from there. I'm curious. So what is something that you feel like you've, as a challenge you've come to now, that you've essentially, let's just say, made it, like you've gotten to a point where you're, in a stable situation? Has any type of motivation changed, or did you notice anything change about your passions for what you're doing? And how did you deal with that and adjust it? Because I personally have had an experience with getting to a very steady type of job, and then I wasn't satisfied and wanted to move on. But how did you deal with that, if that was something that you came across?
Definitely. And I'm actually interested to hear about yours if you haven't already talked about it before too. But as for me, right, I hit a point in my IBM career already where I was doing a role for about 6 months. It was a prospecting role, and I was in that role for about 6 months. And 3 months in, I was like, I'm over this. Like, I'm making plenty of money. I don't really care for this. I'll keep doing it for now. And I kind of chugged along. And I say, when you get close to your goal, that's when you need to be the most careful, because that's when complacency really sits in. That's when you're like, well, I'm doing pretty good. 70, 80,000 a year. That's fine. That's cool. Like, I'm doing good with that. That's plenty. And when that complacency sets in, kiss the rest of your career goodbye if you don't get out of that sentiment. So I would say that I definitely hit that point in my previous role, and I almost stopped caring about the role and about the job. I was caring less about commission even. I'm like, I don't care about the couple grand of commission. I'm making enough. I don't feel like working today. Now, what remotivated me, right, was when those bills started coming in, and when I couldn't buy something I wanted to buy, and I'm like, no, that's not me. I told myself I'd be able to buy what I want to buy when I get older. And I would go to the store, and I'm like, I have to watch what I'm purchasing. I have to look at my bank account tomorrow. I have to make sure there's enough in there. And I'm like, no, I said, that's not what I'll be. And now I need to move up. And that's when I started trying again. That's when I started putting my right foot forward. I started reaching out to other people in IBM. And ultimately, that's how I met Carl and got into the position I'm in now, where I'm doing a lot more than that and have the ability to do a lot more than that. So I'd say watch out for complacency. That is a killer. But yeah, if you haven't talked about yours, Silas, I'd love to hear about yours, because Mike maybe mentioned it, but I don't think I've really heard the story there.
Yeah, just to kind of the summary of it is I did not go to college right out of high school. I was working a bunch of different part-time jobs, and ultimately got an offer to work as an insurance salesperson. And I did about double the average first-year agent. So I was doing pretty well for being 19 years old, making pretty good money. But I started to get to this point where the paychecks were starting to roll in, and it was like super nice. It's what I wanted. I searched for having money too, and I was super dissatisfied. I was like, why am I doing this? So I was like, I have to find something, because I just like stopped working and there was no motivation to be found. So I started looking for what my real passion was, and ultimately went on the journey of praxis and finding my new job and moving to New York and everything. So, I don't want to talk too much about myself at this episode. I like to focus on you and kind of wrap it up here.
Definitely.
But no, I appreciate that background. And I think that that's important for people to remember, especially once they set on this journey, for us to remember that I think especially the point you made about once you get close to your goal, that's when you have to really start looking out, right? That's one of my things my current boss has told me is, as you get closer to the goals, you need to keep extending that. You need to keep moving it out, because if you're in pursuit of something, once you attain it, then what, right? because you don't, if you're in pursuit of a certain stack of money, right? Once you attain it, then what? Then what's next, right? So you need to kind of have this long-term idea and adjust it as you go along. Never let it end, right? In my opinion, you should keep going, and you'll probably live to be much older. Maybe, I want to have you guys kind of offer your closing remarks kind of on what you would suggest as some of the best advice you'd offer to a young person. Maybe let's target the advice here to somebody who's maybe in a stage kind of similar to us, where they're getting to a point of accomplishing their goals and they're not sure, they're losing some motivation. Let's focus on that group of people.
Okay, give me 1 second here, guys. My computer blanked out on me.
No worries. Mike, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So advice to people. My advice is really straightforward. It's I'd say, to your point earlier, don't lose sight of your long-term goals. I found it too myself. I hit that point where I was kind of getting complacent with it. And then I started listening to some podcasts, and I started diving back in and growing my knowledge again. And that's when it hit me. I was like, I'm okay today. Like it's not that bad. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about next year? Like, just because I'm okay today, I'm not setting myself up for success in the future. I'm not doing, I am. I'm not doing anywhere near as much as I can. And at a young age, I made that commitment to myself to always to try to be the best that I can be, to give things every 110%. And so I want an amazing future. And so that motivates me every single day to get after it. And I'd say for anyone out there, somewhat going through those things and losing motivation or wondering about, what they want to do or getting complacent, think about who you want to be in 5 years, not what you want to be doing, not how much money you want to be making, but the type of person you want to be. Or even 5 years, 10 years. Think about when you're married and you have 3 kids, who do you want your kids to look up to and be proud of? And then aspire to be that person and bust your ass to be there. And so that's kind of what I've been chewing on for a bit now. And that's kind of how I've been staying motivated, but I'd offer that advice to anyone.
Definitely. No, definitely, man. And to trickle off that, I just watched, terrible to bring him up, a Matthew McConaughey video the other day. And he said, he was talking about who his hero was. And he said his hero was always him in 2 years. Because that way, whenever he was 2 years later, right, he still wasn't his hero. His hero is 2 years out. And I feel like that kind of replicates what Mike was saying there. As far as my closing advice would go, if you're in our situation, where kind of like where we're at today, our age group, you've probably set a plan forward. If you haven't, definitely get on that. But if you've set a plan forward, right, what I'd say is make it a clear-cut goal that you're getting to. And when you hit that goal, celebrate the shit out of that, because you deserve celebration there. Celebrate the fucking hell out of that, man. Go splurge a little bit because you deserve it. And then the next day, set your next goal and make it 10 times greater, because now you're fresh. You're ready to go. And you're going to say, when I hit this goal, I'm going to celebrate 10 times harder than I just did today for this past goal. And keep it going, because that's what your body, that's what your mind lives off of, is that celebration at the end, that feeling of achievement and gratification for yourself. So set those goals. And when you hit them, don't just move on like any old day. Celebrate that shit. You have to. That would be my closing remarks.
I think that's a good point. I think psychologically speaking, we are made to celebrate when we win, right? It's very good to reward yourself, because then you're going to continue to continue pursuing those types of things. So I guess my final thing that I'd like to offer, maybe on a little bit different note, is, for those people who have reached some level of success and they've felt like they've made it and that things just aren't clicking, don't give up. Just keep pursuing what interests you. Keep learning about the things that are interesting to you. Talk to interesting people, get mentors if you don't already, but don't give up, right? It took me over about a year and a half to really find what I feel like I'm quite passionate about. And that was through lots of conversations, writing blog posts, making podcasts, doing all these things. And it finally got to a point of feeling pretty confident. So don't give up. if you get to that point. And, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're always glad to chat. And I think sometimes it's just good to have somebody to bounce off of. But yeah, I think that was a great episode, guys. I really appreciate everybody taking the time tonight. And we look forward to seeing everybody next time on the Deliberate Zoomer. Have a good night, everybody.